Hi, this is Bhartiya and welcome to another episode of TFR Insight. And today we have a team from LF Energy and Alliander, Shuli and Arjan. I would invite you to introduce yourselves and then we'll get into today's discussion.
So my name is Shuli Goodman. I'm the executive director of LF Energy. And LF Energy is a open source project, an umbrella open source project for the power sector and for the energy transition at the Lennox Foundation. And I'll just let it go from there.
My name is Arjan Stam. I'm Director of System Operations at Alliander. I'm working for 10 years at Alliander, and Alliander is a DSO, a distribution system operator.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction. I would like to understand the role of LF Energy, because if you look at Linux Foundation, there are so many projects, they are all playing different roles. There is a lot of overlap. There is a lot of, kind of cross-pollination. So let's start with LF Energy itself. Why the project was created, what problem you're trying to solve around the globe, and it's actually, it's kind of critical project at this stage, to be honest. So can you talk about that a bit?
There's a lot of things. There are a number of different projects at the Lennox Foundation that will be critical to the energy transition. 5G, automotive grade Linux, cloud native computing, hyperledger, blockchain. And all of those projects will play an important role within the energy transition. For the most part, a lot of the software that needs to be created and the reference architectures and frameworks for the energy transition actually haven't been created yet. And so LF Energy is like a center of gravity that will enable power sector, whether it's transmission, distribution, generation, behind the meter, electric mobility, carbon accounting, to all come together in one place because this is a very complex system. Folks have often referred to the grid as being the largest machine on the planet. One of the principal characteristics of energy and electricity has been the notion of inertia. And what we are actually having to work against and transform is not only the software, but the inertia that's been in the industry. And what we find within LF Energy is that we have people coming together who really have the desire and the intent to move at the speed of technology. And that's the foundation and basis of it. There are many people who are trying to solve this problem. What we're really seeking to be is the center of gravity. By some estimations, 50% of the grid and the solutions of the future will be digital. And it therefore becomes important that we not only be able to produce the software and the frameworks, but we also be able to train developers, train power system engineers, and in general, really drive the narrative around where we're going so that we can break through that inertia and begin to accelerate decarbonization at a planetary level.
Now, when we look at the name LF Energy, if we compare it to the Department of Energy, their scope is totally different versus the scope of the foundation. Because if you look at energy, we are also talking about, of course, grid is critical piece of it. Windmills are there. Solar is coming in. So I want to understand the scope of the foundation, because energy, when you talk about it, it's not just about grid, if I'm not wrong. So can you talk about the scope of the foundation?
I think the scope is pretty broad, and it will really, how far and wide we go really has to do with the ability of the actors in the space to adopt a multidisciplinary approach to solving these problems. The generation and the hardware part, windmills, solar panels, batteries, that's one part of the equation. But then the other part is the way that energy, those electrons get moved onto the grid. And because those are variable energy, it really is incumbent upon actors like Alliander and like the kinds of problems that Arjan's trying to solve, is to create flexibility in their systems so that they can begin to shape loads and resources in a manner to create consistent and persistent energy. Electrons are physics; they're not packets like data. But what I think the combination of electrons and data bring together is the ability to assign metadata to an electron. And that metadata can be describing the carbon intensity of electron. It also can be describing the market signals that need to be associated with that electron in terms of, turn my dishwasher on now, or do not charge my vehicle, or discharge my vehicle. And so I think that what we're trying to do is to create the conditions for a new sort of software to begin to emerge. And one of the things about the work that Arjan's doing and Alliander's doing is that they define and describe themselves as a network operator. And that is really cutting edge. When I think about the work that they're doing, and what excites me about it is that they rightfully understand that moving forward, they're not just going to be a utility per se, but that they're going to be operating a network. And that network is a combination of electrons and metadata. And I think that, Arjan and his team are really at the forefront of understanding that and figuring out how to begin to create the conditions for torrents of data. And so, I'll let him talk about GXF, but it is a fantastic entry and really is putting a flag in the ground saying this is the kind of software we need to be creating in order to enable the grid of the future.
If you look from Alliander's perspective, traditionally when we look at a company like energy, it's like we look at it as utility, just a dumb pipe where you're just pushing it whatever surface or whatever you're pushing. From your perspective, what I want to understand is how has the landscape changed for companies like Alliander, where you also have to become kind of agile and embrace all this technology. Can you talk about that before we talk about the specific project that you're working on? I want to understand the problem, challenges that you're facing.
Yeah, so traditionally the energy flows came from some sort of central point, the big generators, to the households and industry. And that was quite a static process. It has a daily, monthly, weekly pattern in it. And we were quite easy able to distribute the energy from the source to the receiver. But since we start working with renewables, that has changed completely. Meaning that for us, the energy flows not start anymore at a high voltage, at the big generators, but come in really in the fine-grained grid at household level, where there's solar, or in the mid voltage, which is actually at the urban area, where there are windmills and also solar farms. And those energies in feeds really disturb the historical pattern, but it's actually the new pattern. And in order to be able to keep the grid alive, we need to control the energy flows in order to avoid overloading of the grid and get all kind of power quality problems that will appear due to these intensive energy inputs in the low parts of our grid. So that's why we need to become more flexible, like Shuli referred to. Flexible in the sense that we need to be able to redistribute the energy flows. And for us as a company, it also has impact in the way we think, the way we develop, and the speed at which we develop things. So it's complete transformation, basically, that's going on. That's why it's also called energy transition. It's really transition. It's a humongous impact on our company. And that's what you see also internally now in organizational change. So we're now in a big shift in which actually all the old departments within the coming half year will disappear, and we will reshape our company due to the dynamics we need for the energy transition to become really flexible.
No, when you said a lot of department will disappear, there are two things that I see. Of course, there is a technology problem that you have to solve. At the same time, there's a people problem. You have people who have been working at the company for the last, because energy companies are very old, so you have people who are working for 50 years. Some of these people don't actually want to learn something new, so you may have to bring new people. So I want to understand which of these two is bigger challenge, finding the right technology or dealing with people.
I think they're both equally complex. If you look at the technology part, I think we can use to a certain extent proven technology that we shape to energy, basically, because we have a specific environment in which we want to run our technology, and the complexity is more about the scale and the coupling to or markets or the TSOs, and the randomness of which energy flows are injected in our grid. That's a new learning environment because in the past, like I described just now, it was really predictable, and the predictability is disappearing. So we need to become more resilient to what's happening actually in the grid, and need some flexibility in order to take measures to avoid problems in the grid. And the scale at which that is going to happen, so for us it's a third of the Netherlands, that is really injecting a lot of complexity we need to fix, and that's also a new area of expertise we need to build. So we don't have the experience to run such a complex control system basically at that scale. And that's why we also joined the Linux Foundation Energy specifically, because a lot of TSOs, DSOs are more or less in the same phase of the transition, or starting or a bit further. And I think we really need to join to understand the complexity, find really some generic trends in that we can reuse between certain countries or certain areas. So that's one. The other one about the people. What we are doing there is that the new technology is actually quite complex in the way we use it and the way we design it, and it really goes beyond the skill set of the traditional grid operators, specifically talking about my department. But what you see is that the developments take time because of the complexity, the exceptions, and the scale at which we need to deploy. And there's a lot of data issues. So data is not perfect all the time, and all the situations in which you want to do decision making on a system basis, and data is actually not suitable for it, you still have an exception that you need to manage. So how we do that is that we really split the activities between some sort of traditional activities and the more modern, let's call it the advanced activities, and we skill them both differently. So the high-tech grid operations or system operations is really supported and developed by academic people, even PhD people. And the more routine-based activities, the things we did actually from the past, we still need to do them because of the exceptions, and that's the working area of the existing group of grid operators. And that's working quite well actually, and they learn a lot from each other because they ask questions to each other. Why are we solving it in a digital way like this? And the digital people don't have the experience, like you said, they're working here for 30 or 40 years. But the digital people are really putting a lot of effort in the discussion with the experienced people to understand why certain things are happening, and that is really empowering each other. So that's actually a concept that's working quite well here.
I will just talk about the people's problem for a bit, because Linux Foundation also runs a lot of programs which are either certification or training. So from LF Energy's perspective, because you are aware of the problem that the ecosystem is facing, so do you also help the community with some of these training or certification programs? If yes, can you talk about that a bit?
I consider that that's one of my principal roles and jobs is to do that. I'm a digital first person, and then I went and I got my PhD in adoption and diffusion. So I'm working in a highly technical field, and I'm bringing a slightly different perspective. So just to speak to the people part, the transformation part, typically in a diffusion and adoption curve is quite predictable, and it goes at about maybe 2 degrees a year, and so you go from early adoption and then you have a takeoff. What we have from today for the next 10 years is almost an adoption and diffusion curve that's straight up and down. And so what I find and where I spend most of my energy is supporting the technical architects and the data architects and the system architects to be able to define and design something that is adoptable. And so it goes back and forth from functional requirements, and Arjan is managing a portfolio of functional requirements, and then going from there and looking at the technical parts. And so what I think of my job is really creating a supportive environment for that. My background is much more at a social level in terms of stakeholder engagement and governance. And so I think that, there's 2 parts, which is, in our TAC, our Technical Advisory Council, we have representatives from each of the projects, and we meet every other week. And a lot of what we do is provide encouragement, support. We help people define metrics. We help them think about how to build community. And I'm very interested and engaged in understanding who the actors are, what their challenges are, and how to support them, because there is a narrative issue, there is a cultural transformation issue. Sometimes I joke and I say that folks like Alliander and EnergyNet and Tenet and RTE, that they're unicorns. And what I mean by that is that they are very early in an adoption and diffusion curve. They are innovators. But we have to be able to take kind of what they are learning and give them the tools to be able to communicate to their colleagues that may not be as innovative, but nonetheless need to be able to move quickly to meet an adoption and diffusion curve in order to achieve decarbonization that is very intense in the pickup. So, at an early stage of innovation, communication is really between people who are different from each other. But when you really get into that adoption and diffusion and that takeoff, you have to be able to support people like Arjan and his colleagues in other industries to talk to the people who are like them in other businesses and provide those businesses with the confidence that they can join in and that they will be supported in that process.
Alliander, came up they contributed their first project to the foundation, which is GXF. Can you talk a bit about the project, because it was created within Alliander, just the evolution of the project and why you decided it to become part of the foundation?
GXF, it started actually quite a while ago. It was around 2012. It was that the first ideas came up. Then we built as Alliander a really broad portfolio of what we think we would need for the energy transition. That was about markets, that was about large volumes of devices. That was about including the customer into the energy system. And one of them was the GXF. It was formerly known as OSGP. And the reason why we start building it was that we want to be functional in the end to build processes, design our company basically. And we don't want to get bothered all the time with technology of how to communicate to devices, large scales of devices, with different protocols and different telecom technologies. So we want to have a sort of gateway and abstraction for the developers to communicate to a population of devices, and also to maintain a population of devices. So that's why we started out and started developing, and we built it on a rather big use case for ourselves, and that was on public lighting. So we're using it for about between 200 and 300,000 masts of public lighting to manage them, to control them. Looking forward for us, then it was quite obvious. In the past we open sourced it actually already, but we thought it didn't get the attention it actually needed, the product. And it has also a bit more potential than I think than commonly known. So we put it in the Linux Foundation for several reasons. One is that we think GXF is an enabler for to disclose more functionalities, basically on devices, and you need a sort of common platform or gateway to disclose data from devices in order to build functionalities. That was one. The other one was, we spend a lot of effort in it. And I think, if every utility is going to communicate with devices in the end, and also large volumes, because the scale at which we operate. So we could share the experience that comes with that, and also the investment. And third of all, we only built the application for protocols that are valid in the Netherlands for our own purpose. But we built an infrastructure in the gateway that makes it rather easy to build new connectors for other protocols and telecom options. We hope that other parties will pick it up and start using it, because it helps them speed up their technology transition and digitization of their grid.
But I think for the first interaction, we got some core points. We have better understanding of LF Energy. We have better understanding of the ecosystem. Anything else? Any thoughts you have, or should we wrap it up?
I've noticed a phenomena that when a company that has not had a policy around open source decides that they want to engage in open source, it is a highly strategic conversation, because it shifts investment and it shifts the notion of we are going to go and do this all by ourselves. And it is a recognition and understanding that there is a opportunity of doing this together that not only has a business case from a financial savings standpoint, but it also has a business case from the ability to accelerate and to be more efficient and effective at reuse. So I think that the strategy part is critical, and that takes time. These are big and sometimes multi-billion-dollar organizations that are having to turn, and very often the impetus from that comes at the developer level. And so it begins to speak to the internal governance of the organization, which is, are the decision makers, how do developers become influencers in order to support the direction of a company, because they're at a ground level and they're trying to execute something and they're going, this is going to be very difficult if I do this from scratch, but if I reuse something or if I work with this transmission system operator over here or another distribution system operator, we can do this better. And we had a training in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, and I asked a question to the group of 70 people. What are you working on that you would like to have help with? And it was remarkable how many people were working on the same thing all by themselves. And so the strategy part is really to be given, the blessings and the encouragement of management to reach out and to not have every single company have their own IoT strategy or their own cloud strategy or their own open source strategy, but to really begin to be able to reuse it, because that diffusion curve, which is straight up and down between now and the next 10 years, really requires that we build on each other, more like this, than that we, keep doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 150 years.
Moving to open source was actually quite a difficult decision, because it was the unknown. It was a different way of working with actually in the end unknown people. Usually you have your known parties that you do work with, or your internal departments that you work with. But suddenly you decide to open up and start working with people you don't know, and start making products that you are going to use yourself, and that has a lot of impact on the way of working, but also on the mental model. So suddenly it's not about yourself anymore, but about us as an industry in Europe or in the rest of the world, and how to work together and how to share visions on actually the same problems that everybody has, with different perspective. But what you notice in the discussions is that everybody is a little bit afraid of not getting exactly what he or she wants. But the experience, it turns out that that's not the case. You can be really specific about certain problems, you solve them, but it solves actually everybody's problem. And that's really strong. And what I also noticed in a few discussions I had with TSOs and DSOs is the threshold to start working at open source is really a discussion at strategic level, but how it's looked at as a sort of chicken and egg problem. So the community is small, so what can I get at this point in time? But on the other hand, if you don't join, it will never get a big community. So what can I get out of it? And that's really a difficult decision. That's what I notice. It needs some guts at a certain point to say I do it. We start working on it, and we really take the consequences of the decision and transform it into an open source way of working for my specific company. That's a big step. That's really a big step. We were quite easy in doing it, I think, looking backward. But now we see the consequences, and it's having quite some impact. But it's doable. But if we put in the right amount of energy, we can get it to work, and we'll benefit from it. And we see it already start working. We're working together with different TSOs and DSOs, and it's now building it together.
Yeah, actually, I did not even consider that question, because being an open source journalist for 15 years, by now I have assumed that open source is the de facto software development models. So, but you're right. There are still a lot of cases where companies are still going through that kind of mindset problem to, from working as a proprietary, silos, to suddenly move their code in open source, because there's a IP related challenges, there is the whole mindset challenge. Also, I don't know, but within a lot of companies, a lot of bonuses or incentives are based on your performance, not the performance of your team. So sometimes you want to show your code, you just don't want to throw it on GitHub, and so yeah, it's a big challenge. But I also feel that the Linux Foundation and in big part Linux kernel, it actually made commercial vendors comfortable with open source, where they don't have to, no offense to Richard Stallman, but there are a lot of projects where companies were afraid of going open source, but Linux and Linux Foundation made companies comfortable that you can come collaborate and still have your edge in the market. You can Microsoft and Google can be under the same roof discussing while they are fighting in the market for market share. So yeah, Foundation has made big contribution in making company like Alliander more comfortable with open source. So I think we got a very good discussion today. Thank you so much for your time, Shuli, and thank you so much time, Arjan, for this discussion. And since I attended a lot of Linux and Foundation and open source event, I'm quite confident that I will see you two at some point in person, and we'll sit down and have a good discussion in front of camera again. Thank you for your time.